and for the men, you talk about the dominance of UNH for the women's side. On the men's side, we've had 4 different champions the last 4 years. Stony Brook last year, UMass Lowell the year before, Binghamton and UMBC. So 2 very different races. Today we're in the women's race. You kind of had an idea, at least with Purrier, that she would win. A pretty good, strong chance that UNH would win the women's title for the team. On the men's side, though, it's wide open. A lot of teams have a chance today, and a lot of individuals have an opportunity to gold medal.
Yeah, wide open on both sides, as you mentioned. Udvardia, Avery, Crispiondi, Willingham from Maine. Certainly 2 young men, or a handful of young men that can take home the title here today. So Stony Brook, as mentioned, its first men's title since 2012 last year. And an early start here with New Hampshire leading the pack. So again, a little bit of a different approach on the course. Going to have a few more loops, a few more challenges, so to speak, as we look at the 8K overall.
Yeah, and the final 3K of this race is really going to be challenging for the men. As we saw in the women's race around the 2-mile mark of the course, they go up into the woods a little bit. It's running their first uphill track. The first 2 miles mostly flat here at Hardack, but the men will actually go back up for a second time. In the final 3K, they'll go back up into the woods. And we already heard Ellie Purrier talk about the wind, that it was a factor, especially late in finishing. You're pretty much running straight into the breeze. So for the men, there could be some interesting final stages of the race today with the wind, with the fact that you're climbing a second time in the final 3K. So we could see a very close finish, I think. Obviously much more close than the women's, but you could see this come down to the final couple strides of this race.
And you see out to the early lead for UMass Lowell, Paul Hogan, the junior. So you've got Hogan, you've got Thomas Teachin. So the Riverhawks certainly getting out to the early lead. And even talking with the University of Maine and Aaron Willingham, certainly the expectation has been for Aaron Willingham to be out to the early lead. But, back to one final thought about Purrier, what we talked about with not being able to get a new course record, while certainly that wind played a large factor into her slowing down for about 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it was going to be a factor coming in. She talked about how hard it was to finish this race. As we mentioned, it's a south wind, so in that final stretch down that final turn and final straightaway, you're running straight into the wind. So it has to be a factor where that could certainly trim 5, 10, 15 seconds off your time.
So often, as is the case here in cross country, as we focus in on the men's side, at what point do you make your move, right? And that's what a lot of the coaches talked about from Matt Belfield here at UVM on down, is that the course here does not contain a lot of loops. It's easy to make the move and go wide, but at what point do you try and do that, as we see a trio of Riverhawks continuing to set the early pace?
Yeah, well, in the 8K, I mean, it's different. You've got your first couple of loops down in this flattened portion of the course fairly fast. Then you climb the hill, and then you come back down. So, again, there were a number of teams that did compete in the pre-conference meet back here. UMass Lowell was one of them. On the men's side, they had Paul Hogan finishing 3rd, Thomas Teachin 7th, Harrison Millay in 9th. So 3 top 10 finishers in that pre-conference meet, and that is a bonus for the teams that did come up here, like in Albany, like a Binghamton. Obviously, Vermont is the host. Those teams have a distinct advantage. They know the areas of this course where they can make a move, and they know the areas where they need to pull back and maybe reserve some energy. So, again, for the host Vermont, having trained on this course, having hosted the meet, and for the teams that came up in early September, they're going to have that slight bigger advantage in terms of knowing where the changing stages will come in this race.
And you talk about that with Paul Hogan. Paul Hogan, the early leader here for UMass Lowell here on the men's side. Gary Gardner saying, his head coach, that if he stays calm, he's got a chance to win here. And certainly UMass Lowell among those schools that have the advantage, having seen this course, albeit in a different climate, early summer or late summer versus late fall.
Yeah, a little calmer that day, a little warmer. Still fairly ideal running conditions today, but Binghamton had the top 2 spots in that pre-conference top 10. Eric Holt won it in 24:46, and Dan Schaefer was second, about a second and a half behind. So Binghamton's a team to watch as well for the men, at least in terms of the top competitors. And interesting to see how this front pack will change. You've got those 3 UMass Lowell runners, but a number of runners right behind them. So very early in the race as they come around this loop toward the finish line area. And it'll be very intriguing to see kind of what changes throughout this race and if that front pack of UMass Lowell runners is able to kind of hang on.
And it's Paul Hogan continuing with the lead for the Riverhawks. Do you like the approach that they made, Alistair, going a little bit softer in the Central Connecticut mini meet prior to coming here to this America East Conference Championship?
Yeah, I think reserving some energy, saving it for the most important event of the season in track and cross country. You always want to peak at the right time. The most important meet of the season is this conference meet for all these schools. So, backing off your key runners, trying to set them up for success as best you can. A lot of these teams took last weekend off to prepare and obviously getting your routine down. So for UMass Lowell, a lot of these teams, that is the approach, is to try and get those athletes in a peak area to try and maximize their potential in this championship meet.
Obviously the story here, the emergence of the University of Vermont as well. Gavin Schmick, Aaron Lucci finishing 1-2 in the Brown-Rothenberg run. And there's a lot of depth on the team for UVM. Matt Belfield certainly feeling pretty strong about his kids.
Yeah, he really does. And you heard it from Hop there, the UNH head coach. He thinks Vermont could sort of be a dark horse in this meet. You've got Gavin Schmeck, who again won the Rothenberg run. Tyler Marshall, Aaron Lucci, a senior captain, Jack Carmody. A number of runners that could really make an impact today. And talking to some of the Catamount runners this week, they feel as though it's a very unique squad this year in that there's not a huge difference between that first time and maybe that 7th and 8th time. So you've got a team on the women's side like a UNH where Puryear is your top runner. UVM's men's team's really been able to push each other. There's not a huge difference between number 1 and maybe number 10 on the team. So that's a good thing to have, that on any given day they don't quite know who that number 1 guy is going to be. They can push each other, and in terms of depth, that's really going to affect the team standings as well, that they can place a lot of runners, hopefully in those all-conference spots, and build up points.
And as you're watching here at home, we talked about, you remember in the Open, Ryan Udvadia from the University of Albany, certainly a threat. We haven't seen Udvadia up to that first pack of runners. You've got a few Riverhawks from UMass Lowell. You're starting to see a push from a few Stony Brook runners, but certainly if Udvadia wants to make his push, he's going to have to start doing that in the next 1,000.
Udvadia last year at UMBC ran a 24:44 in the 8K. He had his teammate Kyle Gronestage finishing 5th in that race at 24:57. But every runner has a different approach, right? I mean, some of these runners want to front run. They want to get out to a lead. They want to, see no one in front of them. Others prefer to sit back. You look at an Omar Hassan of UMBC that we've seen in cross country before. We've seen it in 10Ks and 5Ks and outdoor track. He's one of those guys that maybe sits back. He plays that pocket role. He waits for his time. He saves his energy, and in that final 1 to 2K, he's able to step it up and create distance. So it's all about strategy. Right now UMass Lowell has it, but it's a long race. Again, there's that end portion of the track of the course today where you're going uphill, and that's really where I think you're going to see a major difference. You'll see some runners lose steam, maybe not being able to recognize that final part of the course today is really going to absorb a lot of energy.
Another note about Albany, Matt Jones saying that there was a 48-second scoring gap, 1 through 6, for Albany back when they ran the pre-conference meet here in early September. So again, it plays into your strategy. The strategy that we were told with Aaron Willingham from the University of Maine. Here's a guy that's going to try and jump out to the lead early on in the pack, dare some people to really stay with him as they go further along. But as this race has progressed, you've seen Willingham maybe taking a little bit more of an approach like a Hassan Omar to accelerate in the last 1,000 or 1,500.
At UMass Lowell, you look at the Riverhawk team coming in 7th in the Northeast regional rankings right now. Stony Brook is 9th, Albany's 12th. So UMass Lowell, again, it's an open field, but according to the rankings, they are the favorite coming in. They ran here well in the pre-conference meet. They have those 3 runners near the front of the pack so far. So UMass Lowell may be early in this race the team to beat. And again, when you have a pack early on of runners like that, from the same team, that plays a huge role. It's not just a pack out front of runners from different teams. You've got 3 teammates who know each other well, and they can really feed off each other.
And as you see at home, starting to loop into the woods. Some amazing shots here from our crew. This is certainly a very fun challenge for our crew to be able to capture as much of the course as possible, but they've done a great job, our men and women here on the America East Television Network. And when you look at how this course has played out, certainly it's going to be interesting to see. You get the feeling that it really is a toss-up, not so much on paper, but because of the conditions as well. That really does play into how this race is going to finish. And as cliche as it sounds, could really be anyone's race if you're at that top of the pack.
Yeah, and I think as you heard, Coach Hop from UNH say that he's just sort of sitting back and being a fan at this point of the men's race. It's wide open, and it really can be, in terms of any team's championship or any individual's championship, it's up for grabs here in 2017. And a reminder that your results are available, 802timing.com, so you can log on to that website and grab your final results. The women's results are in. UNH has won the team title for the 5th consecutive season, and Ellie Purrier of New Hampshire, a convincing win to defend her individual title.
And fans also want to remind you that ESPN3 and the Watch ESPN app are your home for America East basketball and other select sports. To watch games live or on replay, log on to watchespn.com or download the ESPN app. Great to have you with us here today. Hardack Recreation Area, St. Albans, Vermont. John Versteeg, Alistair Ingram with you. It's the 2017 America East Cross Country Championship, and you see the commanding lead for Paul Hogan of UMass Lowell.
And we've definitely seen some separation the last few minutes from the UMass Lowell pack. Paul Hogan out to a commanding lead. He was the 3rd overall finisher at the pre-conference meet for UMass Lowell, and really looking strong here for the Riverhawks.
And at this point, Alistair, it's about maintaining the lead for Hogan and really understanding when to push the pedal on the gas at the right time to accomplish a personal best, but also to get his team into the best situation to win, right?
Yeah, and we're probably around the midway point of the race roughly right now. So still about 4K to go, and again, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the final half of this race, given the fact that the course becomes a lot more challenging. You go uphill into the woods, you come back down. For the women, that would have been the finish of the race, but for the men, they go back up. So we still see, there's that big pack behind, second place through probably about 9th or 10th. A couple of UMass Lowell runners behind there, and Stony Brook and Binghamton involved as well. But, that final portion of the race could sort of bring the pack together as you get those uphill climbs, and certainly the wind as well is a major factor, so that could help to sort of condense the field toward the end of the race.
And we just saw Chris Biondi from Stony Brook in among the Riverhawks leading the pack, so Biondi still in the mix. Cameron Avery from Stony Brook right behind him. The wind continuing to make it feel a lot cooler than what it's supposed to be here today. Unseasonably warm, about 10 to 15 degrees higher than the average normal temperatures for this time of the year in Vermont, right?
Yeah, and you really lucked out. I mean, earlier this week, Thursday, it was low 50s, raining all day. Yesterday was a pretty nice day, fairly calm, but upper 50s. Tomorrow is supposed to rain, lower 50s, so really the one day you needed it to be above 60 and sunny, you got it, although the wind is certainly a factor. It's a really big factor on this back stretch as we watch Hogan running with the lead here. This is where the wind really kicks in. You're in the woods, it's shielded, but you're out in the open here. You're right next to I-89, open in the elements, and the wind is a south wind blowing right in your face. So this is where the runners multiple times during the race have really got to battle through.
And you see, about a 5, 10, 15-second gap between Paul Hogan and the rest of the runners. And in a great situation for UMass Lowell. Don't forget, they came here 2 years ago to the cross-country championships, absolutely shocked the crowd at Stony Brook, won their first ever cross-country championship. So the Riverhawks have been an amazing story the last few years, as we've talked about over the course of the broadcast today.
Yeah, and 3 years ago up in Orono, 2014, they were second. They kind of set the stage for the individual championship 2 years ago. And they really have some runners that could burst onto the scene here in terms of distance. We saw it at the America East Outdoor Track and Field Championships. Paul Hogan was a standout. They had a couple of women's runners that did very well in the 5Ks and the 10Ks. And UMass Lowell just continues to develop depth since they moved to D1. They've always had D1 caliber athletes. Now they're starting to add numbers and really become a power in terms of distance.
And amazing what Gary Gardner has done up there in Lowell. Hey fans, watch America East games and other video content wherever and whenever you want. AmericaEast.tv delivers live streaming of games and on-demand content online, on your tablet, and on your phone. And it's all for free, all at AmericaEast.tv.
And now the leading pack is going to make their way up into the woods, where that's one of the least covered areas of the track, obviously, that the course, I should say, that we have here. We obviously have done our very best to cover every angle possible, but this is the challenging part of the course, where you go up into those woods, come back down, and then right back up for the men. As again, this 8K course certainly a lot more challenging, not just because of distance, but because of elevation change in the women's.
And so often leading up to the race, they're talking about the technical aspects, and the coaching staffs on both the men's and women's side said this is a course that does not have a lot of long loops. Longer loops can slow down the runners, but what we've seen is how fast this course has run. It's kind of been neutralized by the wind.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a very blustery day, and when you're out in the open, it's a big time factor. We heard Ellie Purrier talk about it after her win, that we could see both of our hair blowing around in the interview. You can kind of hear it in our mics, and it is a factor. It certainly is a factor when you're tired later in the race and you're back on that final stretch running straight into the wind when you're as tired as you can be. So there's no mistaking the factor that the wind is playing today.
And while we have a moment, let's go through some conference storylines. Certainly for the University of New Hampshire, their goal is to be in the top 10. We talked about the University of Vermont, one of the three trying to be that fourth, looking to finish fourth outside of the three teams that are regionally ranked. And then you have a University of Maine where they're trying to get their footing underneath them. And we haven't really talked a lot about Binghamton. And Binghamton, as you mentioned at the start, I mean, they won here in the pre-conference meet.
Yeah, the one here had the top two finishers in Eric Holt and Dan Schaefer. So a team that may be a bit top-heavy, but they have a couple of guys in that front pack right now in the top 10 that can certainly vie for that first team all-conference. Binghamton, again, is not as deep a squad as a UMass Lowell or maybe a Stony Brook or an Albany, but you're looking at a team right now that has a couple of key guys that really could push Paul Hogan as we head into the final third of this race.
University of Hartford with a new coach, Stacy Wentz, won a national championship in Division III at Johns Hopkins. And interestingly enough, she was part of the National Student Advisory Committee while an undergrad with the one Amy Huchthausen. Stacy ran at Salisbury. Amy was at Wisconsin, and pretty interesting connection that some years later they're back here connected with the America East.
Yeah, the commissioner of America East, Amy Huchthausen, who's done a fantastic job with the conference since taking over, and a lot of conference connections as well. Hartford, obviously, a program that is on the rise with a new head coach and trying to contend despite some of the differences they have in scholarships and support. It's a program that is going to be tough for them to compete in terms of the team standings, not the same kind of depth that you see in an Albany and more fully funded programs, but Hartford will always have a couple of key runners that are in there and trying to push the pack in these conference meets.
And now you see Paul Hogan coming out all alone with no one behind him. And Hogan coming up here on the stretch run.
Yeah, and you can see there, I mean, these runners are definitely fighting. You can see the flags on the side. They're definitely fighting the wind as they come around this back side. And you can just see the grimaces on the athletes. Obviously, there's still a decent amount to go in this race, but that back stretch is, it's almost like Heartbreak Hill. Even though there's no hill, it's totally flat, but the wind makes it feel like you're running at a 20-degree angle.
Yeah, certainly. And with Cameron Avery, Chris Biondi from Stony Brook, respectively, moving into that. Now there's some separation between 1 and 2, and then the rest of the pack. It appeared that it was Avery that was coming in at number 2, right behind Paul Hogan.
And in terms of the team standings, obviously Hogan has a pretty sizable lead, but you're seeing a lot of depth from Stony Brook, your last 4 or 5 runners in that Seawolf Red. So you're probably going to have a couple of UMass Lowell runners in the top 5 to 10. But then if you start to see some Seawolves in that 5 to 15 range, that's where the points can get very interesting. And to see how UMass Lowell and Stony Brook, you're probably your top 2 favorites coming in along with Albany. How do the points shake out? Does Stony Brook have the depth to counter the top-heavy nature of UMass Lowell's team?
Stony Brook won over Albany on the team side for the men by just 1 point last year. And again, it's worth repeating that last season, both the men's and the women's championship here in cross country decided by 3 combined points.
Yeah, incredibly close, and it's just so interesting to see how different the men's and women's races have been, right? The women's this year, not very close. Ellie Perrier, a distinct favorite. Paul Hogan is starting to run away with this for the men, but coming in, it was anyone's race, and you've got 2 very different looking races the last couple of years where this men's team standings has really come down to a couple of seconds here or there, a difference between maybe a 12th place and a 14th place, and that 1 point has made the difference.
Now the runners appearing in mass, coming out of the woods, looping back around.
And they're actually running in the opposite direction from earlier. This is kind of the starting stretch of the race for the men's 8K. This is where it loops back. They're running on the same track but the opposite direction to go back up in the woods one final time, loop around and finish the course.
And again, so many folks on the conference level and on the school level talking about how friendly this is, how spectator friendly this course is, and it's a large part of the reason why, because of the loops coming back around here in the wide open areas where family and friends can cheer on the runners.
And you're seeing, as usual with a cross-country meet, there's a couple of areas of the course where you can kind of, watch the runners go by one direction, move over, watch the runners come in the opposite direction. You see that giant wave of spectators moving side to side, and it is, it's not quite a condensed course, but in terms of the loops and the viewing areas, it is spectator-friendly, and certainly a gorgeous day here in Vermont to host the 2017 event.
Fans of the America East urges you to spread respect by ensuring equality and safety for all coaches, student athletes, and fans without regard to race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity. John Versteeg, Alistair Ingram with you as you are watching Paul Hogan cruise towards a championship here in men's cross country. We are here on the men's side, the 8K race of the 2017 America East Cross Country Championships. Earlier, Eleanor Purrier won her fourth consecutive cross country championship. New Hampshire, its 5th team title. And UMass Lowell certainly looking good as we come down the stretch run.
Paul Hogan's in his junior year for UMass Lowell, which just joined Division I about 5 years ago. And it's certainly a program that's made a major impact already on the D1 stage. And Paul Hogan, which you saw at the start, was in that small pack with his teammates, has really stretched that lead. And that's the second straight race now we've seen a sizable cushion for that lead runner.
And Hogan accelerating. And he's across that finish line for Paul Hogan, your 2017 America East Cross Country champion. And now we'll size up that scoring gap and see who's going to finish second, third, fourth, and fifth, and as mentioned, a Stony Brook Seawolf about ready to finish second, and it is Cameron Avery who finished third last year. Avery, just a freshman last year, and he is into second place. So now, so important with the jockeying for position. A pair of Seawolves, a Maine runner sprinkled in there, and now New Hampshire and Stony Brook too. So this is going to be interesting, Alistair. 1 and 2, how close the race is going to be for the men between Stony Brook and UMass Lowell.
Yeah, you had Thomas Teachin in there for UMass Lowell. It appeared as though UMass Lowell was able to grab 1, 3, and 4, so they get the major points near the top of the race. But again, we talked about Stony Brook's depth. Now you're starting to see those Seawolves trickle in. They're going to secure a lot of spots in the second team all-conference, and that could eventually add up if UMass Lowell can't grab a few more spots. 9 total runners competing for each team, so 90 runners in each race, and you add up the top 7 for each team, and then you've got your team champion. So UMass Lowell's in the driver's seat, but it's certainly going to be tight, as Stony Brook had a lot of runners in that 5 to 20 range.